At the Cradle of Monsters, we tell stories the human way. Not with artificial voices, not with AI slop. Real storytelling that makes you feel something a machine never could. My name is Rena. Let's begin. The orders came through at 0200, which was, in Commander Sarah Voss's experience, the hour at which the military delivered news it was hoping you'd be too tired to argue with. She read them twice. Then she set her coffee down on the desk of her quarters aboard the ICV Resolute and looked at the bulkhead and thought about all the things she was going to say to Admiral Graves when she got him on the comm. And then she thought about what would actually happen if she said those things, which was that she would be relieved of her command and replaced by someone who wouldn't say them. She read the orders a third time. Effective immediately, Commander Voss will assume joint operational command of Strike Group 7, alongside Warmaster Dresh of the Karath Imperial Guard. The strike group will consist of 2 human vessels, ICV Resolute and ICV Patience, and 3 Karath warships of the Dawnbreaker class. Mission: penetrate and destroy the Void Collective's supply chain network at coordinates Delta 9. Estimated hostile force: 200 collective vessels. Mission timeline: 72 hours. She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. You need to understand what the Karath were before I tell you what happened between Sarah Voss and Warmaster Dresh, because the story is about what changed, and you cannot understand the change without understanding what was there before it. The Karath were the oldest spacefaring civilization in the settled systems. Not the most powerful. That distinction had shifted enough times over their 6,000 years of documented history that claiming it had become meaningless. But the oldest in the specific sense that mattered. They had been doing this the longest, and they had formed, in those 6,000 years, very specific opinions about what doing it correctly looked like. They were bipedal, taller than humans by a significant margin, with a deep gray-blue skin that darkened with age, 4 eyes arranged in a slight curve across a broad face, and a physical density that suggested their homeworld's gravity had been somewhat less forgiving than Earth's. They moved with the deliberate economy of people who had been trained from childhood to use exactly as much energy as a task required, and not a fraction more. They did not gesture when they talked. They did not raise their voices. They communicated precision, always. Their military tradition was 6,000 years old. Ours was, depending on how you counted, somewhere between 5,000 and 20, depending on whether you were counting organized combat or space combat specifically. The Karath were precise about the difference. They were precise about most things. They had agreed 3 months ago to a joint military operation with humanity against the Void Collective, which had been raiding both their supply chains with increasing aggression. The agreement had taken 14 months to negotiate. 14 months of careful language and careful concessions and careful avoidance of the specific question that both sides knew was at the center of everything, which was, do we actually trust each other to fight beside us, or are we just temporarily pointed at the same enemy? The agreement did not answer that question. It just made the question official. Warmaster Dresh was waiting on the command bridge of his flagship, the Karath vessel Immovable, when Sarah Voss's shuttle docked. He stood at the center of the bridge with his hands behind his back, and his 4 eyes on the viewport and the posture of someone who had been standing exactly like that for his entire adult life, and found it entirely comfortable. He was 63 standard years, which in Karath terms was senior but not yet elder. He had commanded a fleet at 38. He had been involved in every significant military engagement the Karath had fought in the preceding 25 years. His file, which Voss had read 3 times on the shuttle over, was the file of someone who had never once been surprised by a situation he had not prepared for. He turned when she entered. His 4 eyes, the outer 2 slightly larger for peripheral awareness, the inner 2 sharper and more forward-focused, moved across her with the quick, complete assessment that she had come to associate with experienced military officers regardless of species. She had done the same thing to him. Commander Voss, he said. His galactic common was exact and unaccented in a way that suggested he had worked at it. I have reviewed your service record. As I have yours, Warmaster, she said. Your record is unusual, he said, for a human officer of your rank and age. She waited. You have led 14 operations, he said. 11 were successful. Of the 3 that were not, 2 involved circumstances that your after-action reports describe as equipment failures. 1 involved a decision you made that your report describes as incorrect. He paused. Most officers do not describe their decisions as incorrect in official reports. Most officers aren't, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A fraction. The quality of his attention changed slightly, the way the light changes when a cloud moves. I have been given joint command of this operation, he said. You understand what joint command means in practice. It means we agree on everything or nothing moves, she said. Yes. It means, he said, that I have spent 25 years commanding operations alone, and am now required to reach consensus with a human officer about decisions that will be made in the time frame of seconds. He paused. I want you to understand that I consider this a significant operational risk. I consider it one too, Voss said. The difference is I think the risk is manageable. On what basis? On the basis that you have 4 eyes and I have 2. And in my experience, people with more ways of seeing things tend to catch what the others miss. She met his gaze. The inner 2, which were clearly the ones he used for direct attention. Your record shows you've never lost a ship to an unexpected flank attack. Mine shows I've repelled 3. Different training, different instinct. Neither of us sees the whole picture alone. Dresch looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is either a very good argument or a very good performance of a good argument. Give me 72 hours, she said. You'll be able to tell the difference. He turned back to the viewport. The mission briefing begins in 20 minutes, he said. Your crew has been assigned quarters in Section 7. They will find the gravity calibration slightly higher than Earth standard. I suggest they adjust. They'll manage, she said. Yes, Dresch said, and she could not tell from his tone whether he believed her. Part 2, the friction. The first 18 hours were the worst, not because of hostility. The Karath were not hostile. They were precise and they were professional, and they had been given clear orders from their command structure to cooperate with the joint human element, and they followed orders with the specific thoroughness of people who understood that following orders was not optional, and had internalized that understanding so completely it had become indistinguishable from inclination. But precision and professionalism, Voss had learned over a career in coalition operations, were not the same as trust, and you could follow orders perfectly and still communicate, in 100 small ways, that you were following them rather than choosing them. The Karath officers on the joint planning sessions sat together. They deferred to Dresch on everything, with the quick, unified consensus of a group that had been working together long enough to have a shared internal language that didn't require words. They answered questions from Voss's officers directly and completely, and in the exact amount of detail required, and not a syllable more. They did not eat with the human crew. They did not use the joint recreation spaces. They were, at every moment, correct. Correct was not warm. Correct was the temperature of very cold water. Voss watched it and noted it and said nothing about it to Dresch, because she had enough operational experience to know that the first 18 hours of any coalition operation were always the worst, and that saying something about the temperature of interactions in the first 18 hours was the surest way to make them colder. What she did instead was work. She put herself in the joint planning sessions for every hour they ran. She asked questions that she already knew the answers to, because the answers would tell her things about how the Karath planned that the documents hadn't. She listened to how Dresch's officers talked to each other in the moments between formal exchanges, the speed of it, the shorthand, the things they didn't say because they didn't need to. And she built a picture of how they thought. On the 19th hour, she sent her tactical officer, Lieutenant Kwame Asante, to find the Karath navigation specialist, tactician Iren, with a specific technical question about the approach vector to Delta 9. Asante came back 40 minutes later with the answer and something else. She asked me a question back, he said. Voss looked up from her display. What question? She wanted to know how we calibrate our targeting systems for moving targets in debris fields. She said their system has a lag at high relative velocities that their engineers haven't solved. He paused. I told her we use a predictive algorithm that accounts for debris scatter. She asked if I could show her the parameters. Voss was quiet for a moment. Did you? I said I'd need to check with you first. Tell her yes, Voss said. And Asante, take the time. Don't just send the parameters. Sit with her and walk through it. Asante nodded and left. Voss looked at the approach vector on her display. A technical question. That was where it started. Not with speeches about alliance and cooperation and shared values. With a targeting algorithm and a debris field and a lag that hadn't been solved. She filed it away. Warmaster Dresch conducted his own assessment of the human element with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. He had read the files. He had read the operational histories. He had attended 17 briefings on human military doctrine over the preceding 6 months in preparation for this joint command. He understood, intellectually, what human forces could do and how they did it. What the files did not prepare him for was the noise. Not literal noise, though the human quarters were audibly more active than Karath quarters at most hours, which he noted with mild consternation. The noise of their process. The way human officers operated in the planning sessions was, to Karath sensibility, chaotic in a way that was difficult to watch without feeling a physical need to impose order on it. They interrupted each other. Not rudely, or rather rudely by Karath standards, but apparently not by their own, because no one seemed to register it as interruption. They proposed ideas that were immediately challenged by other ideas. They argued, quickly and loudly and without apparent damage to the relationships between them, and then they changed their minds, sometimes mid-sentence, and moved in a new direction with the same energy they had brought to the previous one. They seemed to arrive at conclusions not through deliberation but through collision, and the conclusions, Dresch had to acknowledge, were frequently good. He watched Commander Voss in the planning sessions with the specific attention he reserved for things he did not yet understand. She did not impose order on the chaos. She operated within it. She listened to 4 conversations simultaneously. He could see it in how her eyes moved. And she let them run, and then, at the moment when the collision had produced something, she said the word that turned it into a decision. She was not directing her officers, he realized. She was processing them. It was a methodology he had no framework for, and had never encountered in 6,000 years of Karath military doctrine. He found it unsettling. He also found himself watching for it. On the 22nd hour, Dresch requested a private meeting with Voss. They met in the joint command room, neutral ground chosen deliberately. He had reviewed the targeting algorithm parameters that her lieutenant had shared with tactician Iron. He placed his data slate on the table between them. The predictive model your officer provided, he said. I want to understand the underlying assumption. Voss sat down across from him. Which one? The debris scatter coefficient. It assumes a specific distribution pattern for fragmented hull material in vacuum. Our models use a different distribution. He pulled up a comparison on the display. I cannot determine which is more accurate without field data. Ours comes from the Kessler engagement 18 months ago, Voss said. 3 ships destroyed in close formation, significant debris density. We ran the targeting systems through 1,100 variables and pulled the coefficient from the pattern that matched observed behavior. She paused. What's yours based on? Theoretical modeling from our physics institutes, Dresch said. 600 years of refinement. Has it been tested against observed engagement data? A pause. The opportunity has not arisen under conditions that produced sufficient debris density. Voss looked at the comparison on the display. Then she said something that Dresch had not expected. Let's use both, she said. Parallel systems. If they diverge in field conditions, we flag it and adjust. If they converge, we have confirmation from 2 independent methodologies. He looked at her. That introduces redundancy. It also introduces error checking. He considered this. In Karath doctrine, redundancy was inefficiency. A system should be correct the first time, and the way you ensured it was correct was to refine it until it was. The idea of running 2 systems simultaneously in order to see which one was right in the field was, from his perspective, an acknowledgement of uncertainty at the level of methodology. He was about to say this, then he remembered the 3 operations in her file, the 2 that had failed due to equipment failure. the one that had failed due to a decision she described as incorrect, and the 11 that had succeeded. Parallel systems, he said. We will review the divergence data after each engagement phase. Voss nodded. They sat for a moment in a silence that was different from the silences in the first 18 hours. Not warmer exactly, but different. The difference between the silence of two people with nothing to say and the silence of two people who have just said something. Your officer, Dresch said, Lieutenant Asante. He explained the algorithm to tactician Irin in a way she found comprehensible. Kwame is good at that, Voss said. Irin said he did not condescend. Voss looked at him. Why would he? Something in Dresch's expression shifted again. That fraction. It is not uncommon, he said carefully, in coalition operations, for the party that holds a technical advantage to communicate it in a way that also communicates the advantage. That's a waste of time, Voss said. If Irin understands the algorithm, she uses it better. That helps us. Dresch was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. It does. The approach to Delta 9 began at 0400 on the second day. The Void Collective's supply chain network occupied a dense asteroid field at the edge of the system. A deliberately chosen position, Voss had noted in the planning sessions, that made orbital bombardment impossible without destroying the infrastructure they were trying to capture, which meant ground engagement was not optional, which meant the strike group's 72-hour timeline was optimistic. She had said this in the planning session. Dresch had said he agreed. It was the first thing they had agreed on without a subsequent discussion. The strike group moved in the formation they had spent 12 hours designing, a formation that existed in no manual on either side, because it had been built from the specific capabilities of the specific ships present, which was how Voss always built formations, and which was, she had gathered from the careful attention Dresch's officers paid to the process, not how the Karath typically operated. You design each formation from the assets, Dresch had said during the formation planning session. Not a criticism, an observation with a quality of genuine interest. Every asset is different, Voss had said. A formation that works for the assets you have is better than a doctrine formation that works for the assets you're supposed to have. He had been quiet for a moment. Then, our doctrine assumes standardized assets. How often are your assets actually standard? Another pause. Less often than the doctrine assumes. Then the doctrine is optimizing for a situation that doesn't exist. He had looked at her with an expression she was learning to read, the slight forward focus of his inner eyes that meant he was filing something. They hit the first collective picket line at 0537. 40 vessels, light class, positioned to slow an approaching force while heavier assets repositioned. Standard collective defensive doctrine, which both sides had studied and could anticipate. What neither doctrine fully accounted for was the speed differential between the human vessels and the Karath warships. The Resolute and the Patience were built for acceleration. Human warship design had been shaped by Earth's gravity. The engineers who built them came from a species that had spent its entire history optimizing for movement in high-gravity environments, and that instinct was in the ships the way it was in the people. They could push velocities and pull maneuvers that the heavier Karath Dawnbreakers could not match. Which meant, in a tight engagement with a picket line, the human ships could go where the Karath ships could not. Voss saw this in the first 90 seconds of the engagement, and made a decision without consulting Dresch, which was technically a violation of Joint Command Protocol. She split the formation. The Resolute and Patience broke high and accelerated through the picket line's flank at a velocity that forced the collective vessels to redistribute their targeting. The three Karath Dawnbreakers, freed from the pressure on their slower line, drove through the center with the specific devastating efficiency of ships that had been built for frontal assault, and were now executing exactly that. The picket line collapsed in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. In the silence after, Dresch's voice came through on the Joint Command channel. You split the formation without authorization. I did, Voss said. The protocol requires consensus before formation changes. The protocol was written before either of us knew what our combined velocity differential would look like in a live engagement, Voss said. I made a judgment call. A pause. The judgment call was correct, Dresh said. The flank pressure forced a redistribution that created the gap our center line needed. Another pause. I would not have seen it in time. You would have, Voss said, in the next engagement. Perhaps. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. For future engagements, if you see a formation opportunity that requires immediate action, you have my standing authorization to act. I will adjust to your movement. She held the calm for a moment. And if you see something I'm missing, then I will act and trust you to adjust, he said. That is what joint command should mean. It was not a warm statement. It was a precise one. But precision, she was learning, was how Dresh expressed things he meant completely. The second engagement was harder. The collective's main defense force had repositioned during the picket line engagement, faster than the strike group's intelligence had predicted, which meant someone on the other side had good field commanders and was using them. They came out of the asteroid field in a pincer configuration, 70 vessels targeting the formation's flank simultaneously. Voss had 2 seconds to assess. She keyed the joint command channel. Dresh, pincer on both flanks. I need your center to hold and draw fire while we close the exits. Understood, he said. Immediately. No deliberation, no request for elaboration. He had seen it too. The immovable and its 2 sister ships drove forward into the center of the pincer with a steadiness that Voss watched on her tactical display and felt something she didn't have a clean name for. Not admiration exactly. Recognition. The recognition of watching someone do something that they were specifically good at. The Karath center held under fire that would have broken a less steady force and drew every targeting system in the collective's pincer onto their hardened hulls, which meant the Resolute and Patience had clear trajectories to the exit points. They closed them in 7 minutes. The pincer, unable to escape and unable to break the Karath center, disintegrated. In the debrief that followed, a joint session, all officers from both sides, which had been Voss's suggestion and Dresh's agreement, Tactician Iron pulled up the debris scatter data from the engagement and compared it against both targeting models. The human predictive coefficient performed better at high relative velocity, she said, with the directness that Voss had come to recognize as a Karath virtue. The Karath theoretical model performed better in the low-velocity close engagement phase. She paused. A combined coefficient would outperform either independently. Dresh looked at Voss. Voss looked at Dresh. Can you build it? Voss asked Iron. With Lieutenant Asante's input on the human model parameters, yes. She looked at Asante. How long would you need? 4 hours, Asante said. Maybe 3, 3.5, Iron said. I'll start now. She left the room without waiting for dismissal, which was, Voss gathered from the slight expression of the Karath officers around her, slightly unusual. She caught Dresh's eye. He said nothing, but his expression said, I see it. On the 3rd night, with 18 hours left in the mission window and the main collective supply depot within range, something happened that was not in the plan. The patients took a direct hit from a collective weapon system that their intelligence had not flagged as present in the sector. The weapon's impact pattern was unlike anything in either side's tactical database, not because it was powerful, which it was, but because it targeted specifically the electromagnetic systems that controlled life support sequencing. The patient's life support did not fail. It went into a cycling loop that meant it was functioning, but unpredictably, switching atmospheric balance at intervals that were making the crew progressively less functional. Voss got the damage report at 0300. She read it and thought about the crew of the patients, 340 people. And then she went to find Dresh. He was in the joint command room when she arrived, which meant he had received the same report and had come to the same place she was going. They stood on opposite sides of the tactical display and looked at the problem. We cannot complete the depot assault with the patients compromised, Dresh said. No. Withdrawing the patients reduces our assault capacity by 30%. Yes. We also do not know if the collective has additional units of this weapon system positioned to target the Resolute or the Dawnbreakers. He looked at the display. Our intelligence was wrong once. It may be wrong again. Voss was quiet for a moment. What would Karath doctrine say? She asked. He looked at her. It was a direct question, and she had delivered it as one, not as a test, but as a genuine inquiry. Karath doctrine, he said, would assess the probability of mission success against the cost of failure, weight the importance of the objective, and make a decision. If the probability of success with reduced assets falls below a specific threshold, the mission is aborted and a new approach is planned. What's the threshold? 40%. She thought about it. Our current probability of success with the patients withdrawn against the repositioned collective forces, given what we don't know about that weapon system? Dresch had clearly already run it. 37%. She nodded. So doctrine says abort. Yes. She looked at the display. The supply depot. The collective's network. The reason this operation had taken 14 months to negotiate and 72 hours to execute, and had brought 5 ships and their crews into a sector they had no guarantee of leaving. What does 37% feel like to you? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. The question was not, by any measure, a Karath military doctrine question. He understood that. He answered it anyway. It feels, he said carefully, like a situation in which the 3% below threshold matters less than the information we have gained about how our forces operate together and what we can achieve if we find a way to use it correctly. Voss looked at him. Then we're not aborting, she said. We're adapting. Tell me the adaptation. She pulled up the depot schematics. The weapon system that hit the patient's targeted electromagnetic control systems. It needs a clear signal path to work. It can't penetrate dense material. The asteroid field gives us cover if we use it. She traced a route. We route the Dawnbreakers through the field on a vector that gives them electromagnetic cover the entire approach. They're better suited to the frontal engagement anyway. The Resolute goes high and fast. Different angle, different approach signature. Split the targeting problem for anything they have left of that weapon system. Dresch studied the route. The Dawnbreaker approach through the asteroid field requires navigation at speeds our pilots have not trained for in field density this high. Iron and Asante finished the combined targeting coefficient 2 hours ago, Voss said. It handles debris scatter at high relative velocity better than either of our original systems. Have your pilots use it. He looked at the route, then at her. You planned this before you came in here, he said. I planned one version of it, she said. I needed to know what doctrine said before I knew if this version was the right one. And if doctrine had said something different, then I would have adapted the version. He was quiet for a long moment. Commander Voss, he said. In 25 years of command, I have had 3 officers whose judgment I trusted completely enough to follow into a situation I had not planned. She waited. You are not yet on that list, he said. But I believe you may be in approximately 18 hours. It was, by any measure, the most personal thing he had said to her since she arrived on the Immovable. Let's go get your depot, Warmaster, she said. The assault on the collective supply depot began at Oro 4:30 and lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes, which was an hour and 9 minutes longer than the plan had allowed for. The Dawnbreakers went through the asteroid field on the new combined targeting coefficient, navigating debris density at speeds their doctrine said were inadvisable, and they held the line. Their pilots were, Voss observed on the tactical display, extraordinary. The specific quality of extraordinary that comes from 6,000 years of training, producing people who could make impeccable decisions in very small windows of time. The Resolute went high and fast and drew the remaining units of the unknown weapon system into an exposure they could not sustain, and Asante, who had been studying the weapon's signal pattern since the hit on the patients, identified the targeting frequency in the first 7 minutes of the engagement, and gave Voss the data she needed to break the lock. She broke it. The weapon system fired twice more after that, and missed both times, because it was now targeting a frequency that the Resolute systems were no longer broadcasting. The depot fell at 0841. In the after quiet, the specific silence that follows an engagement that has cost something and achieved something, and left you unable to immediately distinguish which is larger, Voss sat on the bridge of the Resolute and looked at the tactical display and thought about 340 people on a ship with compromised life support, who were now being assisted by Karath engineering teams, who had, without being asked, docked with the patients within 20 minutes of the depot's fall, and started working on the cycling problem. She had not asked Dresch to send them. He had not told her he was sending them, they were simply there. She keyed the joint command channel. Dresch. Commander. Your engineering team's on the patients. The problem is electromagnetic sequencing, he said. Our engineers have more experience with this specific class of failure than yours. It seemed efficient. It was, she said. A pause. The kind that had content in it. Commander Voss, he said. The 37%. Yes. You were right that the 3% below threshold mattered less than the information. Another pause. I want you to know that I understand the distinction between following orders and choosing to trust someone. This operation has been the latter. She held the calm. For me too, she said. The mission debrief was held jointly, all officers, both sides, on the Immovable's command deck. It ran for 6 hours. Every decision was reviewed. Every deviation from the plan was documented. Every adaptation was analyzed. At the end of it, Dresch presented a joint report to both command structures that recommended the combined targeting coefficient for immediate adoption across all joint operations and recommended the formation-building methodology Voss had used for inclusion in a proposed joint military doctrine framework, and recommended that joint human Karath strike groups be considered a standard operational structure rather than a coalition exception. The report was signed by both of them. It was the first jointly signed military doctrine document between humanity and the Karath in 6,000 years of Karath history. Voss read her copy of it in her quarters that night and thought about the cold coffee on the first night and the 22 hours of correct but cold professionalism and the moment in the joint command room when Dresch had said, "Let's review the divergence data." Like it was obvious, and the specific quality of watching the Dawnbreakers hold a frontal assault under fire while trusting her to close the exits. She thought about Asante and Iran sitting in a workroom for 3.5 hours building something that neither of them could have built alone. She thought about engineering teams on the patience that nobody had asked for. She thought about what it meant to fly with someone into a situation that neither of you had planned and come out the other side of it knowing something about that person that a file could not tell you. Dresch wrote his own report that night. It was a private document, not classified, just private, the kind of thing a senior officer writes when they need to organize their understanding of something before they can move forward from it. He had spent 25 years believing that military effectiveness was a product of training, doctrine, and the specific accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had been doing this for 6,000 years. He had believed this not arrogantly, or not only arrogantly, but because the evidence supported it. The Karath military record was, by most measures, the most successful in the settled systems. What the record did not show was this. Every situation in which they had been the most successful was a situation that their doctrine covered. And their doctrine, built over 6,000 years, covered most situations, but not all of them. The situations it did not cover were the ones where the problem had not been seen before. Voss's methodology, the formation building from specific assets, the parallel systems for error checking, the adaptation in real time, the judgment call on the pincer that he would not have seen in time, was a methodology for situations that had not been seen before. It was built for novelty. It was, in a specific and uncomfortable sense, more suited to an uncertain galaxy than doctrine built for certainty. He did not write this in the report. He did not need to. He had filed it somewhere more permanent. What he wrote was this: joint operations with human forces have produced tactical outcomes that neither force could have achieved independently. This is not a statement about capability. Both forces have significant individual capability. It is a statement about perspective. Human operational methodology approaches uncertainty as a problem to solve in real time. Karath methodology approaches uncertainty as a problem to eliminate through preparation. In an uncertain engagement, which is to say, in any sufficiently complex engagement, the combination of these approaches produces better outcomes than either approach alone. I recommend that we continue. He set down his stylus. In the corridor outside his quarters, he could hear the faint sounds of the human crew in Section 7. Quieter now than they had been in the first hours, but still present. Still the particular quality of aliveness that he had initially found disruptive and had, somewhere in the preceding 72 hours, stopped finding disruptive. He thought about Voss saying, "Give me 72 hours. You'll be able to tell the difference." He had been able to tell the difference. He turned off the light and looked at the stars through the viewport and thought about what 6,000 years of certainty could learn from 20 years of improvisation. He thought, quite a lot. 6 months later, the joint military doctrine framework proposed in Dresch and Voss's report was still under review by both command structures, which was, as Voss told Asante, approximately 5 months and 28 days faster than she had expected. The combined targeting coefficient had been adopted by 3 additional joint operations and was in the process of being integrated into both sides' standard targeting systems. Tactician Yiren had been promoted. Lieutenant Asante had been promoted. The patient's life support was fully repaired, its crew healthy. Its captain still annoyed about the electromagnetic weapons system that no one had flagged in the intelligence. Voss was in her office on the Resolute when the communication came through. Not on the official channels, on a private frequency that she recognized because she had given it to exactly one person outside her own crew. She opened it. "Commander Voss," it read. "I have been asked to lead a second joint operation. The mission parameters are more complex than Delta 9. The force composition would include 4 Karath vessels and 2 human. I have been asked to recommend a human joint commander. I have recommended you, I want to be clear that this recommendation is not made because the previous operation was successful, though it was. It is made because successful joint command requires a specific quality that is difficult to identify in advance and can only be confirmed in the field. You asked me what 37% felt like. I want you to know that the answer I gave you, that the information we had gained, mattered more than the 3% below threshold, was the first time in 25 years of command that I gave an answer to that question, based on something other than doctrine. That is what I am recommending. If you are willing." Voss read it twice. Then she opened a reply. "Warmaster, I'm willing. One condition, we build the formation from the assets again." Voss. She sent it. She went back to her coffee. It was warm.